All right. Welcome, everybody, to our second set of concurrent sessions for the day. I'm William with the Prince William Sound Stewardship Foundation, and I have Skye Steritz with us for our 4:15 to 4:45 chat. So, Skye is of Celtic descent, working on Eyak land in Cordova, Alaska. She's a regenerative kelp farmer, environmental educator, and elementary school special education aide. Her top passions are social and environmental justice. Uh, she's a volunteer for Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council and sits on the advisory circle of the International River Collective. Ooh, very cool. She studied international water cooperation and diplomacy in graduate school, focusing on ways countries collaborate to manage transboundary waterways. All right, welcome, Skye. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, William. Hi, everybody. Thanks for
Yeah,
being here. I'm just going to share my screen.
awesome.
Here we go. It looks like it's just loading. Okay. How's that looking for everybody?
That looks great. I've got a good view of it.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm just grateful to be here today. I'm excited to share with you a bit about my experiences of kelp farming in Prince William Sound. As William said, my name is Skye Steritz. I'm the president and co-founder of Noble Ocean Farms, which is a small scale regenerative kelp farm here in Simpson Bay, which is about 11 nautical miles from Cordova. And so we live and work on the lands of the Eyak people. And also, when we're kelp farming, we're on the waters of Alaska Native peoples. So just want to take a moment to acknowledge and extend our gratitude to the Alaska Native people who have stewarded these lands and waters for thousands of years. And I also want to say thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon. Okay, and so I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation. I'm just going to share a little bit about my background first. So I was raised with a deep reverence for the ocean, thanks to my parents. They raised us always in the water, snorkeling, and then they got me scuba dive certified when I was 12 years old. I think that's the youngest you can get scuba certified. So I always loved the water. And when I was 21 years old, I spent a year living in Ghana in West Africa. And that's when I decided that I wanted to fully devote myself to water quality and preservation. Um, and I ended up getting a job when I got back to the States at the Kenai Watershed Forum in Soldotna. So for a couple of years there, I was doing the Adopt a Stream environmental education program with Alaskan youth. And then I was also doing the Stream Watch program. So I fell in love with Alaska, and I was first invited to this region, to Cordova, by an Eyak elder whose name is Dune Lankard. And you may have heard of his work before in terms of both kelp farming and lots of other environmental activism and advocacy. So Dune originally invited me here to work for the Eyak Preservation Council, which is a nonprofit organization that works to protect these lands and waters. And so I got a lot of great experience working with him, and just an amazing team of elders and young people alike here that are working to protect the Bering River coal fields, working to protect the Gulf of Alaska, um, and the Copper River watershed. So I learned a lot from working with these folks. And then in 2019, Dune invited my partner Sean and I to be part of this first wave of um, kelp farmers in Prince William Sound. So we started both doing our research and reading books, searching online about different articles about kelp and its impacts, and what happens if you grow it on lines in the ocean. And Sean comes from a background in fisheries research and biology and management. So we're both really passionate about um, having a positive impact on the environment and setting a good precedent um, in our lives and everything we do. And so we were excited about this opportunity to farm kelp here, and we ended up saying yes to Dune's invitation, and along with 7 other small family farms, we went through the permitting process, and that's the beginning of how Noble Ocean Farms got started. So it's been a whirlwind since then, and we were also really driven by the reality that we saw here in Cordova about a lot of families, including ourselves, having trouble accessing enough healthy produce, especially in the winter time, because we are off the road system and we do live in a climate that makes it pretty challenging to grow crops on land, at least enough fruits and vegetables that we need to sustain our community. So we really wanted to help also address the food insecurity issue and to help people have access to more nutritious greens on a regular basis. So both the fact that we learned about how kelp is crucial habitat, food, and actually a tool for climate resilience too, which I'll get into later in terms of reducing ocean acidification locally in the waterways that it's grown. We were motivated by all those environmental factors, but also by the social factor of wanting to build a more resilient local food system here in Cordova. So today I'm a 28-year-old kelp farmer, and it's really exciting, and it's an honor to be part of this budding industry here in Alaska. And I think it's really important that um, all of Alaska's coastal communities get involved in the conversation now to speak up about what they want mariculture to look like in the local waterways, because we just want this to be a positive force and to uplift local people, and especially make sure that Native people and young people and women and fishermen all have a shot at this. So it's important that we all kind of keep a pulse and know what's going on and start to voice those visions of what we want it to look like in our area. So as I mentioned, one of our top priorities in farming kelp is to address food security. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later about all the exciting things that you can make with kelp. We've been having a lot of fun experimenting lately, following our first harvest with just all kinds of different dishes. And it's just been really rewarding to be able to distribute and deliver kelp around our community and see the creative things that people come up with. And, some people have already been eating with kelp for thousands of years in their cultures. So there is a long-standing history of seaweed being part of the diet here in Alaska. And so some of those health benefits that kelp can provide includes omega-3s. It's a really rich source of omega-3s. It's also really rich in vitamins A, B, C, and D, and also K. And it's really dense in minerals as well. So something interesting that I've talk to friends who are passionate about nutrition about is that on land, our topsoil has been so decimated that the minerals you get from crops grown on land has declined dramatically in the last 60 to 100 years. So, one of my friends was informing me about, our modern day potato. Now you have to eat 5 potatoes to get the same amount of minerals that you used to get from one potato. So, because of soil degradation in a lot of the areas where we're doing heavy industrial agriculture, a lot of our foods are flown up from down south, and those soils just aren't as healthy as they once were. But the ocean is still abundant in these minerals. So, kelp being grown in seawater is really rich in zinc, iodine, magnesium, iron, potassium, calcium. Um, 1 cup of kelp actually has more calcium than 8 ounces of milk. So it's really good for promoting bone health. And man, there's tons of other things that I've just been learning from reading and talking to people. But yeah, great for preventing diabetes and just enhancing our immunity, our immune system strength. So it really is a superfood, and it's pretty exciting to be able to make it accessible to Alaskans. So yeah, these are a couple of dishes that we've had fun making with kelp. So you can see there's a poke bowl there with the seaweed salad and just a beautiful piece of fish wrapped in kelp. So that's a really fun way to work with it. Also, you can just take the big blades of kelp and wrap your fish in it when you're going to put it over the grill, and it'll help retain the moisture of the fish and infuse it with more flavor. And it also makes the kelp like a really nice smoky flavor. And the cool thing is that kelp is not just beneficial to us as a food source, but also drives much of the food web in cold water marine environments like Prince William Sound. So we learned from listening to Dr. Tom Mumford and reading some of NOAA's studies that 30% of carbon in quillback rockfish is derived directly from kelp. So the fish are not only getting habitat and nursery and refugia from the kelp, but they're also getting a food source from it. Yeah, so that's a really exciting thing for us too, is knowing that um, a lot of fish use kelp as habitat at key life cycle stages. Excuse me. And then scientists refer to this halo effect that kelp farms create in the surrounding water. So, for example, we're farming in Simpson Bay, in the western arm of Simpson Bay, and uh, this halo effect refers to the localized impacts that a kelp farm has of increasing the water qualities um, for all the animals that live there. So kelp is photosynthesizing, it's sequestering tons of carbon and also outputting a lot of oxygen through that process of photosynthesis. So it creates these oxygen rich pockets, and it's helping to reduce ocean acidification, which is great for the ocean and great for our communities to support healthy fish and shellfish. This is a research project that we got to take part in this year, led by Dr. Sherry Umanzer at University of Alaska down in Juneau. So she sent us this really cool nutrient extraction toolkit, which just had everything you need to take water samples and tissue samples from each of the kelp species. And that's going to allow us to understand, she will be able to quantify how much carbon and nitrogen our kelp is uptaking at different parts of their life cycle. So we took 3 water samples 60 days before harvest, 30 days before harvest, and then right at harvest. And we also took 10 tissue samples of each species at each of those sampling events, and then sent them down to her lab. So yeah, when we talk about building climate resilience, definitely there's still research going on, and that's really important research. And it's really cool to be able to collaborate with scientists who are focused on that specifically. So this was one of 2 research projects we got to be a part of this year. The second one was working with San Diego State University on studying the microbiome associated with kelp farming. So those folks were just up here about a week ago, taking samples from kelp on the farm, and they're analyzing what microbes are living there, and then they can try to learn about which ones are beneficial to the kelp and which ones are detrimental to the kelp, and potentially through farm design encourage those that are more beneficial. So just a bit about what kelp farming actually looks like. This is an array. We call it an array. It's basically a rectangle of lines, anchors, and buoys at the surface. And it's holding tension underwater because of the anchors and the structure of the lines. So you can see the grow lines are going horizontally parallel to the surface of the ocean. And ideally, you want them about 7 to 8 feet below the surface. We found that ours were sinking deeper than that this year. And I think that was part of our challenge, is in not growing quite as much kelp as we were hoping for. Was that our lines were probably too deep in the water so that the kelp wasn't accessing enough sunlight. So to give the kelp more opportunities to photosynthesize, we are going to be doing some marine debris cleanup, and we're hoping to source any old used buoys, picking them up off the beaches, or just working with fishermen who don't need them anymore, potentially, so that we can have tighter buoy spacing next year, more buoys to keep those lines closer to the surface. And along the lines of using old gear instead of buying new things, we also use these decommissioned Alaska Railroad wheels as our anchors on the farm. So yeah, the Alaska Railroad, we got this idea from Dr. Rob Campbell here in town, but it was an excellent idea. We were able to put these 800-pound railroad wheels to good use, because they have to be decommissioned for safety reasons. They can't be used on the railroads after 10 years. So all the wheels get decommissioned after a decade, and then they're just sitting in a stockpile in Anchorage, and we were able to use them. But that was a tricky part of the process. Of course, deploying those anchors and trying to get it just right, trying to make sure they land in the right place, in the right position. So once you have all the gear deployed in the water, you want to outplant. That's the name that we call it for seeding the lines with sori from the fertile wild kelp beds that were collected about 6 weeks before this happened. So we outplanted this year on October 22nd, and we were gifted this seed actually by our friends at Native Conservancy, and they grew the seed with the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute over in Seward. And we seeded over 4,000 feet of line, but we only used less than 1/10 of our permitted farm site. So we're hoping to increase and probably double the amount of lines that we put in the water for the next few years until we reach our full capacity. So we're permitted for 22 acres, but we only used about 2 to 3 acres this year. And then, of course, once you seed the lines, you have to go check on your farm all throughout the winter. Make sure that your gear is still intact, that your lines aren't crossing. We did experience ice on our farm this year, which I think is pretty typical for a lot of mariculture operations. You're in the shallower part of bays, but that was a challenge too. You have to sometimes physically break through the ice to access the lines. And I just wanted to show what the growth was like. So you saw from seed in October to this photo in December, still super small, maybe only a few centimeters. And then January, you're at a few inches. This is all sugar kelp. February, you can see that's getting significantly larger, a few feet on some of the blades at that point. Then you can see April, some of our longest sugar kelp blades were like 7 to 8 feet at that point, but the ribbon kelp was much smaller, and even when we harvested, it was pretty small. So we're trying to figure out why. Maybe our site's just better suited for the sugar kelp. And we were harvesting on our little pocket seiner called the Lindy. And you just use the same insulated totes that fishermen use. And you're pulling those lines up, and we did most of it by hand and then wrapping around a deck winch that you can't see outside of this picture. But then you have to put the lid over the tote, keep seawater in it, and keep it fresh while you transport it back to town. And these are some of the foods that we like to make with kelp. And once we got all of our kelp distributed, we had just photos flooding in from friends to making all kinds of delicious things. But this is a poke bowl with seaweed salad, and then kelp and halibut chowder here, which is one of our favorite things. And actually, the Reluctant Fisherman, the restaurant here in Cordova, is going to be serving this at their first ever farm to table dinner this Friday. And I was mentioning this earlier too. Another great way to cook with kelp is just to wrap it around fish. Of course, it pairs beautifully with salmon. And so you keep your fish nice and moist and really flavorful by wrapping it in kelp, just like you would with tinfoil. Okay. And I am just truly grateful to be able to share my experiences with all of you, and to be able to have the opportunity to farm kelp here in general. I think it's really special, really meaningful, and not without challenges. Definitely takes a team effort. This is certainly not a solo act. We've had tons of friends helping us along the way, and yeah, just grateful to everyone for being here and supporting us. And I would love to hear if folks have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Skye. That was amazing. I have a ton of questions, but we have 3 questions from our audience members. So I want to get to those first.
Okay.
So let's see. The first question we have, although kelp farming is new to AK, has anyone thought about kelp farms around herring spawning areas to harvest and sell on a national market?
That's a good question. I know that, yeah, that used to be really popular, or still is really popular, herring roe on kelp, but the regulations for our kelp farm don't allow us to harvest any kelp that has spawn on it. So if the herring decide to spawn in that area of Simpson Bay, then we would have to leave the kelp completely. So it wouldn't be able to be sold at all, or touched, actually, just left there. And then, I mean, we're in full support of those fisheries. So we want the herring fishery to be strong and recover. But yeah, we're trying to figure out what we could do at the state level to potentially compensate farmers for that. If that happens to their farm and they're not able to harvest, then because you're actually helping restore the environment and that fishery, then maybe you could get compensated for that.
Was that at all an issue for you in this first year?
No, we didn't see any herring in that part of Simpson Bay this year, but I know that they can go there. It's definitely happened before. So,
Got it. Okay. Our next question is from George. If I wanted to eat some wild kelp, what should I look for?
ooh, that's a good question. George, I'm going to guess that you're in Alaska, because there would be different species of kelp in different areas. But so the three main species that are being grown, and three of the species that are great to eat, are sugar kelp, ribbon kelp, and bull kelp. And they all look a bit different. Let's see if I can go back. The sugar kelp has dimples down the center. So that's its defining feature. If you see those dimples there down the middle, that's sugar kelp. I'm not sure if I have a great picture of the ribbon kelp, because this one's really small, but you can see there's a midrib that's like a stem going down the center of it. So that would be a defining feature for ribbon kelp. And then bull kelp, of course, is very unique compared to these other species, because it has these pneumatocysts that act like buoys that bring it to the surface. So it's a floating species rather than the other ones are sinking downward from the lines, but the bull kelp grows up towards the surface. So this one I know is very popular among a lot of Alaskans for making pickles, all kinds of fun foods. But yeah, using those stipes, so the stem we call the stipe, and that's what Barnacle Foods uses to make their pickles and their hot sauces and things. So if you slice that, then you have this fun circular vegetable to play with.
Cool. Is it better when it's at any particular stage of development? Young, old?
Yeah. So for almost all kelp, you're going to want to target your wild seaweeds around early spring. So like we did all of our harvesting in April, and then we noticed in May that the quality is just not as good for food consumption. So yeah, so harvesting wild seaweeds, generally I would say April is a good time. But then for the bull kelp, it's a little different. That we've been told more like June to August is a good time for harvesting bull kelp.
Okay, great. And another question from David. Have you heard of any conflicts, i.e. entanglements in lines with whales at any kelp farms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is a question that has come up that I've heard other people talk about, and I've done some searching on the internet, and I personally haven't found cases of that. It definitely hasn't happened in Alaska since kelp farming got started here in 2017. So I think that, the farms are designed to not do that, right? So there's not like a bunch of crisscrossing lines. It's like you just have these horizontal lines that are spaced out. So it's designed to not allow whales to get entangled. And the Department of Fish and Game is also monitoring that and, making sure that we are using the right designs. And yeah, as far as I know, it's not an issue, but I think it's an important thing that we just all keep an eye on and make sure that that never happens.
All right. Well, Skye, that's all the time we have for this session. For your poll, we had a 100% positive response to what are your feelings about kelp farming in Alaska. So that's awesome.
Nice.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing your experience. And I'd love to follow up with you and ask a million more questions. But yeah, thanks again. And for those joining us here, we're going to go ahead and close this session, and we're going to continue with our 445 Indigenous Kayaks of Alaska with Andrew. So go ahead and switch on over to that and join us. I'm very excited about that one. And once again, let's all give Skye a virtual round of applause. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
All right.